On the surface, it's very easy to write off What the Golf as one of those carnival sideshow type of games, where it's going out of its way to be wacky, to be weird. I mean, the what is happening nature of the trailer is what drew me and many others to the game in the first place, being something really not seen before in that flavor in recent history in the industry, along with games like Untitled Goose Game. But under that surface is a game that not only may surprise many people from a gameplay standpoint, but a game that shows off some very smart developmental decisions, as well as great theming and understanding of the gaming industry. What the Golf is currently available on the Epic Games Store on the PC for $19.99, as well as on the Apple Arcade for its subscription price of $4.99, with the game coming to the Switch at a later time, but with no confirmed release date. Let's start off this review with what you're going to end up being here for: the gameplay. The basics of the game are, well, golf. I mean, seriously, you're buying a game called What the Golf. Of course it's going to be based on that. You swing your mouse around the ball on the PC version and where you'd hit it with an actual putter, while I'm assuming you use the touchscreen on an Apple Arcade device. Your power is based on how close you are to the ball, as being far from the ball will go to maximum power, while being close will be minimum power, as you would expect. That's the base controls of the game, mind you, and they apply to around 50% of the game's scenarios. But as you'll come to learn, some of the scenarios will change things up slightly, and you'll have to adapt to new controls or controls that are slightly altered. That's the first thing that you need to understand about What the Golf. It may be golf, but it's twisted forms of golf. Sure, most of the time your goal is to hit whatever your ball is at the hole flag, but each ball has its own physics properties and little caveats that you'll have to adjust to on each level, as well as the hazards that you'll have to get by. Sure, the comedy of hitting yourself at a hole instead of a ball, for example, will make you laugh and enjoy the absurdity. But then you realize that it presents you an actual challenge to actually successfully navigate your body to be thrown at the hole itself, as your body flops in the wind. Most of the holes in the game have 3 modes with them, one being the regular version of the hole, and 2 other versions of the hole with a variety of modifiers or specific scenarios related to the mechanic in question, and this vastly differs from hole to hole. Sometimes you'll need to just complete the hole in a specific amount of strokes, usually the least amount you can get away with to complete the course overall, while others will have you racing against sheep to get to the hole before they do. Thus, the variety of scenarios that you run into also have variety in them, and you'll be rewarded in an area for doing all the extra holes with an unlock of some sort in the main game, although it's not a cosmetic unlock or anything like that. At least I don't think so. I really couldn't tell exactly what these things did. All these modes are testing various skills that you'll end up getting over the course of the game, whether it be judging the precision of a shot to make and having to thread that needle to minimize the strokes you are using, or calculating in your head how fast something is moving so that you don't run into it. It does each of these individual aspects rather well while changing up the challenge between them on a regular basis, despite the fact that I would consider the game on the easier side overall. But that's a point I want to make right here and right now, talking about the difficulty. With quick starts and really no punishment for attempting levels repeatedly, at times it can feel like the game is a breeze, even when it's taking 5 to 10 attempts a level. Sure, there are difficult levels that will take a lot of attempts and precision, but there are some levels where I will admit the ability to rack up 20 strokes by just spamming the stroke button can make certain challenges trivial. Granted, those levels usually have their extra stages that have a par limit on them, but I don't know. Something about being able to spam in certain stages always bothered me, but I couldn't really say that it truly downgraded the experience. In fact, the fact that the game put no pressure on me really allowed me to enjoy the game's overall feel and its absurd nature. The game's humorous and tongue-in-cheek nature is what co-drives the experience, as the game doesn't even have to tell a specific joke in order to make you giggle and smile. All it needs to do is put you in charge of a horse that acts a little goofy while galloping, and that's all you'll end up needing to enjoy yourself. But again, don't let that fool you. The homage to Super Hot, for example, makes use of the speed mechanic wisely to jump out of the way of bullets, adding a pseudo-puzzle element to the game that performs a lot stronger in certain stages than others, while others will test your reflexes and your ability to shoot down targets in a first-person mode. I've seen people try to make specific comparisons to other games and try to match exactly what this game is, and I think I've got a good idea. It's sort of like the WarioWare of golf, and your levels are a little bit longer, yes, and the pause between them are a little bit longer, but it's a bunch of small mini games with little themes and little attributes to them that you'll have to adapt to, and they have an overall theme of get ball in hole, but it always changes depending on your scenario. The pick up and go nature of the game allows for any length of play session, whether it be just quickly doing the daily challenge, which is a random selection of maps to get the lowest amount of strokes, or doing 2 entire areas of a map in an hour-plus gaming session. I know, it's not the right term to use in this case, but I'm amazed at how accessible this game is when it comes to the type of player, whether it be the speedrunner or the casual gamer. I see all players being able to find enjoyment out of this game, thanks to a smart selection of features and bonuses in which to keep the players interested. Speedrunners, for example, will find that the game tracks the number of strokes, minutes played, and even splits it off at the end for certain percentages of completion. While those who don't care about it, it's out of the way, so it isn't something necessary to deal with. It's all those small touches that I refer to there that give the game the flexibility to allow for that accessibility, and yes, I know, not the accessibility that you normally think of here. For example, one of the most appreciated things about the implementation the developers did here was making failure instantaneous, so that you could get right back into the game on the next attempt. Yes, I understand that most games would want you to do that, but some games would want you to think about, oh hey, what did I do wrong? But here, it's like, nope, get right back into the action. It allows you to experiment with the ridiculous solutions and attempts without feeling like you're really wasting time here, which really works for this game's advantage. It can lead to even more hilarious scenarios and laughs, even though it didn't force that upon you. Hell, one of the funnest things in this game is seeing how ridiculous a run can get and how you could save yourself from falling off an edge, or what you can do to knock everything off the stage before actually completing it. When it comes down to it, most of the complaints I have about the gameplay are little minor things that start to add up over time, but can be annoying in retrospect. For example, there are levels where you basically have to rotate your cursor around the ball repeatedly to get the speed you need. It's a nice change of pace in certain cases, but if you're not precise and not paying attention, you'll lose that speed. But that's not my complaint. The complaint is that there's no stay on screen option, where your mouse can fly off the screen in dual monitor formats, and it can get annoying to disconnect from the game in that way and lose your momentum. I think the biggest weakness of the minigame structure has to be when there's a roadblock that you really don't understand how to get around it or why it happens. For example, in this level, every time that this bike goes into the windmill explodes for some reason, and I die, and yeah, I don't know exactly why. Now, there's a way to do this level, but sometimes the frustration of not getting feedback that makes sense or being poked in the right direction can be frustrating. Yes, you can move on easily to another level, but it just sort of sticks with you a little bit and sort of gets under your skin. Now look, I know I didn't dive too deep into the specifics regarding all the gameplay types in this section, but I believe the journey of going through them on your own, figuring out the little tricks here and there, as opposed to just breaking down all the mechanics in there, and enjoying the boat ride that the game will take you on is important for the overall experience of this game. You may ask, why did you do a video review on this then? Well, I wanted to emphasize that the perception of the game being wacky and goofy, while true, overshadowed the game's real value under the surface in the minigame portion. I've seen a lot of people talk about the fun of the game, but not necessarily indicate that no, the game design here would work even without that fun aspect to it, but it helps. Moving on to the presentation, the game's use of light colors and simple shapes give it a relaxed and childish atmosphere, while still allowing for reasonable detail in the overall structure. For example, the use of semi-spears to make layers of an evergreen tree is smart, yet gets across the image rather nicely, while not being too overly detailed to cause major drawing work. It's the perfect medium to go across multiple platforms, whether it be the 4K edition on the PC or on the screen of a Switch while walking and moving around. The animation work here is very hingent on the game's physics engine, and you'll notice that the game may feel a little off at times with certain objects due to this in terms of its movement. I mean, the body flopping around gets the idea across rather nicely thanks to this engine, but there's no purposeful refinement in most cases, and yet for some reason it works. Your chair gliding across, they were able to get it feeling like an actual office chair. And sure, you'll get a nice dirt streak coming off a sheep to represent it racing, or the touches that are specific to the scenario in question to capture the feel of the game or the scenario that it's going for. But a lot of the work is done by the engine here, and it was a smart move by the developers. They didn't refine it too much. The presentation shines, however, the most when it's using the inspiration of other games to create a level and capture their presentation within the What the Golf world. The game goes from the world of super hot, with the gray and red visuals with the soothy voice of the announcer for Super Golf, to the sterilized rooms of an experimental portal room from Valve's famous game. Yes, it's a little ironic that it ended up being an Epic Store in that case, but let's move on from that. It's clear that the developers love all forms of media, in particular in the video game genre, as indie classics such as Gravity Ghost to the beloved Mario series ended up in some form on the screen one way or another. You feel the love of all these different environments, and it's frankly not hard to see that bleed into other aspects of the products, even the weaker parts of it. I also like how the proportion of things are ridiculous at times to emphasize the importance of them, such as the torch for our Olympic runner here, and the slight effects for things that need to draw your eye, like the aforementioned flame and the dust trailer on your competitors while you're racing them. It's also pretty interesting to me regarding the presentation that regardless of the scenario, not many darker colors are used until a lot later in the game, or in very, very specific applications, which fits the laid-back nature of the game more than anything else. I'm actually also a bit surprised on how adaptive the presentation was to perspective changes too, such as this scene of sniping at things across the way, or even the first-person shooting sections. You'd think the detail and the camera perspective would force the presentation to change a little bit in terms of maybe some of the detail. But no, each camera angle works to give you what you need to see everything in front of you while still feeling of this world and not having this weird out-of-body experience. In fact, it's one of the nice things about the game. The perspective changing over and over again in certain cases can make it feel, well, have a little bit more variety. Again, as I mentioned in the gameplay section of this review, it's clear that every element here is designed to work in lockstep with the rest of the game. And man, did they get the most out of all these elements. Well, mostly. Sound design, on the other hand, while competent, felt like it was missing something for me in the oomph department. Yes, the bowstring firing when I let go of an arrow in a section would make a sound, and an arrow hitting the ground would make a sound, but I expected more over-the-topness related to it to really complement the game that you were playing. I mean, the game does the job in giving you audio feedback so you know that your shot hit, or that you hit a specific element in the environment. But I guess with everything else going on, the sound design for me could have had more pizzazz and really amped up the experience for me, well, in some areas anyway. Again, when the sound design is related specifically to the subject matter at hand, in particular when games are being used in conjunction with the gameplay, that's where this absolutely shines, especially when the game is mimicking audio clips or even songs related to the games that they're parodying. Let me just give you a sample of some of the sound design in action, so you know exactly what I'm referring to. Does the presentation of What the Golf stand out compared to other indie games in the genre? No. Does it do its best to complement the gameplay and work perfectly for the game at hand? Yes. Yes, it does. And that's what you want from a game like this. You want a presentation that doesn't get in the way, but adds a nice touch here and there. Moving on. From a technical standpoint, What the Golf isn't anything special, but it doesn't really have to be for the gameplay in question. I mean, it is 60 FPS and goes up to 4K resolution on the PC. During my 24 hours of gameplay, I didn't see any slowdown at any point, or at least one that was caused by the actual application as opposed to another program running in the background chewing up memory. Thank you, Adobe Premiere. Really, it is all about the options when it comes to games like this. And yes, you've got music and sound sliders and resolution selections up to 4K, along with 15 languages that you could see on screen right here. You've also got the expected options of full screen, borderless windowed, etc, etc. But as I mentioned before, there were certain options I would have loved to see here, like a stick to window with mouse option for those specific windowed modes that you didn't necessarily want to click out of, but still wanted the windowed mode there. Overall, the technical elements, they're fine. Really, it isn't what this game is about, so that's why this section is going to be a little short. Finally, let's talk a little bit about the story. Well, sorta talk about the story. There isn't really a traditional story of any sort here. It's all about environmental storytelling in the overworld and the little logs that you come across in there. Basically, the game is about little scenarios that you run across that are experiments of sorts, which explains why you end up getting the vast variety of references that you get, along with the locations. Sure, you can end up telling stories in these scenarios and why they were programmed that way, and try to make some lore and some logic for yourself. But really, it's more of a bonus and a structure for the gameplay more than anything. Granted, there is some funny lines embedded in the consoles you come across here, and there are moments that make you grin. But when it comes to traditional storytelling, an overarching arc, things like that, the game isn't exactly going to be your cup of tea if you absolutely need that kind of thing. I really don't want to go further than that. Again, not the point of the entire game here. It's supplementary material, and the writing is clever when it's used. But I don't want to spoil that writing, And frankly, it's not enough to talk about in terms of an overall drawing factor. So, the story is what it is, and leave it at that. In the end, What the Golf is one of those games that brings a smile to my face, and I didn't let go of it for most of the experience. Sure, you'd get one hole that would get you confused or would frustrate you a tiny bit, but for all of those, you'd be quickly hitting the tee, laughing at the absurdity of each scenario, while really appreciating the differences of all the various mini-games that you end up playing, while them keeping relatively the same. While the ride will change during the entire length of the gameplay, what won't change is the fun the game presents to you. And frankly, the game gave me my money's worth even halfway through the experience, so content really isn't an issue here. Sure, it's not going to test your gaming prowess. It's not going to revolutionize the gaming industry. But you know what? You're gonna enjoy it. And that's why the game gets an 88 out of 100, making it a solid buy unless you're hurting for cash. But that doesn't take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective elements of games and fits the game to you. If you fall into one of the following categories on the screen, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, then refer to this chart on the screen to see where the game falls in the buyability range for you. Again, this is not going to be a game for people who are expecting a story or expecting a lot of hardcore difficulty, but it's a game that definitely has its audience and may be worth a try for even those who are questioning whether or not they'll enjoy it, because most likely, you will. That's it for this review, and I'll be going on a vacation cruise in the next week or so. So unfortunately, you won't see content on the channel, even streams, for about 10 to 12 days. The week I come back to, depending on if I get a certain job or not, could also be rough, and I am trying to ramp up to my end of the year list already, considering the research that goes into them. I'm sorry I didn't get the new review format video out, but frankly, there's a reason why I'm taking my time with it, so don't expect it anytime soon. Anyway, leave your feedback in the comment section below, and leave a game that you think may be underrated for 2019 in there as well. This is Dragnix signing out, and as always, keep on gaming.